Hello, welcome to my channel, That Mishlei Guy, where every single day we open our Bibles to the book of Proverbs and we examine what Solomon has written for us, except that's not what we're going to do this time. This is actually the second video in a series that we're going to be doing where we're addressing the actual architecture of wisdom. Feels like it needed its own explanation, and rather than take each word apart each time they appear in a proverb, to just kind of put together a playlist where we discuss what each of these individual terms are. Just as a real quick recap, our first video, we established that in the Hebrew language there was no concept of a human mind. You had individual thought processes, and all of these thought processes were almost like tributaries into a river. They pour into this wider thing called wisdom, Hokmah. And we're going to now look at each one of these individual tributaries and see what each of them do in their function of feeding into this wisdom. I just feel like it wouldn't do it justice to try to explain each of these terms every time that they appear, and it would make the Proverbs videos unnecessarily long. So the one that we're going to do today is going to look at the idea that there are 6 pillars that form the base foundation for wisdom, and we're going to look at the first 3. These are the ones that are developed internally. We'll do a video tomorrow that will deal with the ones that are developed externally. And in that last video, the primer, we looked at the concept of the first thing that feeds into wisdom is this idea of sakel. And sakel it translates as intellect or intelligence. There's nothing you can do to increase or decrease it. Well, I guess there are things you can do to decrease it. You can use a lot of drugs or fall off of a high structure or something, but at any rate, the sakel that you were born with is what you were born with. However, there are 3 things that you can increase inside of you based on your own discipline and your own experiences. The first one is what is known as dat, and that is knowledge. That's going to be the primary thing that we're going to focus on. That'll be the first one that we're going to really look at. The second one that we will develop is what's known as Binah, that is understanding. And the third of the internally developed traits is closely connected to Binah, and that is Tevunah. And that is insight and discernment. So we're going to very first start off with knowledge, and this is the word dat, and it comes from the verb yada. So if you ever watched Seinfeld and they're saying yada yada yada, what they're actually saying is I know. But the word dat, it appears in the Proverbs 14 times as a noun and 70 times as the verb yada, to know, and then 3 times as an adjective meaning known. And basically there's going to be 3 major components to how knowledge is acquired and the function that they form. Because of its use, it's the most commonly referenced one. You could say at a certain level it is the most important, because nothing else can proceed till you have knowledge. You have to get it first. And so in that sense, it's the building block of knowledge. But the first thing it does is just basic cognition. This is just raw data collection. It's just pure information. As you go through life, you learn things, and you kind of just like stockpile them, and that is going to be the first layer of paint down of your base of knowledge. And once you have stored and retained this knowledge, the second part that knowledge covers is recollection. And this will be your memory. This is the ability to recall and bring it up and access it when you need it. And this is going to largely play into the idea that you can establish and recognize patterns. And the other beautiful thing in the Hebrew language is this idea of dat. It's not just a pure mental function. It's an expression of like intimacy. It's the actual experiences you have. It's the familiarity. So it's one thing to conceptually know about a car, but it's another thing to like actually pop the hood and have worked with the wrench. Like you're going to have a little bit more knowledge than somebody who's just conceived of the concept. And so knowledge is first of all acquired through just basic curiosity. It's from reading and studying and then just paying attention, listening to things, and absorbing more and more and more information. So you're going to limit the amount of knowledge that you can acquire if you're not a curious person. The person who asks a lot of questions, who's very, very engaged over the course of their life, they're going to acquire and get a lot of knowledge. The second area where knowledge is acquired is through teaching, and that's going to kind of play when we get into the externally developed traits, but that's going to come from instruction and parenting and schooling and just education. And then the third is what we had kind of talked about, which is through experience. You learn this from interacting with other people. You learn it from firsthand experience of just doing actions and traveling. And so somebody who has done a lot of different things are going to have a much more well-rounded knowledge than somebody who's stayed like stuck in the same place and never really expressed any type of curiosity. But knowledge is going to lay this very, very broad foundation for wisdom to operate on. And so think of it like pouring a foundation. The larger that foundation is, the more support that it's going to provide, the bigger the structure that can go upon it. And the other two mental processes that we're going to talk about and explore today, like none of them exist prior to knowledge. Knowledge must be the very first thing. And the big thing with like Western civilization, it's how we developed the idea of a liberal arts education model is, sure, you may be going to school as an architect, but if you have a well-rounded amount of knowledge, like say you know something about some language or some art, history, those kind of things, is the actual circuitry of the brain, the more that it's engaged and the more ways and more directions that it's engaged, the bigger its capacity to learn the subject that it's actually going to specialize in. So that the broader you can make your base of knowledge, the more that it's actually going to help you when you focus in on something. But the way I like to think of the well-rounded person who's got a lot of knowledge would be, think of like the Jeopardy champion. He has no idea what questions are going to be on the board. They can be anything. And the person who's going to win at Jeopardy is going to know a lot about a lot. And the wise man is this is always we're trying to become this idea of what's known as the Hocham, the wise man. And that's the midway point on to becoming what we actually want to become, which is the Sadiq, the righteous man. But the first step of wisdom is delighting in learning things and to have like a true thirst for knowledge. And the main reason why is it's going to enlarge your perception. The more things you know about, that you're going to have more data points. And so the more data you actually have, the easier it's going to be to synthesize that into what we're going to discuss next, which is understanding. But that's you basically, you're not going to be able to have wisdom in all these areas of life if you didn't start with first knowledge. And most of this is it's going to begin in the heart, is just actually wanting it in the first place. And it's a beautiful thing that they teach in Judaism, is that the wise man can learn from everyone, even the fool. He's always, any interaction, he sees that as an opportunity to learn a little bit more about life, to expose himself to more information and experiences, to where even the foolish person can teach him something. He can teach him why the fool is a fool and the things he needs to avoid. So he takes everything in at face value, at good faith, as an opportunity to learn. And the big thing with knowledge is it only really becomes knowledge when you retain it. So many times that is through reinforcement. And so while knowledge is this wonderful thing that we're all supposed to be pursuing and trying to acquire, there are challenges to it. And the big thing that we're going to reinforce in all of these lessons is that wisdom has limits. God tells us again and again, do not rely upon it. And so one of the big challenges that you get with knowledge is that the world is too large and the human life is too short, and your brain deteriorates over time. So there's never going to be someone who knows everything. That just as the world's too large, and God uses mystery. If he doesn't want you to know it, he'll hide it. He didn't have to let you know everything. Another thing with knowledge is it lacks self-awareness, so it doesn't know what it doesn't know, and without depth, just acquiring knowledge for the sake of knowledge, then it's like we were talking about the Jeopardy champion. It's just trivia. It's just a way to show off of what you know. But the big thing that we will see, and this is especially crucial in the modern era, is that knowledge can have untruth mixed in with it, and it doesn't progress to what our next term is going to be, understanding, until you have the ability to differentiate. And so it's a tremendous, the internet is this wonderful tool in many ways, but then in other ways it's disastrous, because someone can read a Wikipedia article and suddenly they're an expert, and now you throw in the availability of AI and the things that it sources its information from, and just how unreliable these things are demonstrating themselves to be, is just, you can read things that are wrong, and the way that your brain is structured is it's going to stockpile it as though it were true. And so there's going to require another aspect of development to kind of filter out what is true and what is untrue. So we always have to be aware, no matter who you are. Like you can memorize something incorrectly. You can have received bad information, and you will use it as a data point in how you decide and determine things. And we're all vulnerable and susceptible to this. So other challenges with knowledge is, if you pursue it excessively, you can neglect other parts of your life. And there's a lot of people that have made themselves tremendously depressed or crazy because they never hit the pause button. They're just constantly absorbed and saturated in knowledge, and it can actually at a certain point you got to go out and live life and start applying it. You can't just sit in the back of the library reading the books 24 hours a day. And the other big deal is we're going to see this with every element of wisdom, is wisdom always has to be morally tempered. That it has to be, if it's just developed on its own sake and there's no moral development, well, then the human instinct is going to be to use it for its own purposes, and that'll involve abuse and corruption and evil. And so there's a whole reason why there's an entire field called ethics, and that is kind of like the thing in Jurassic Park. You never ask, should you do these things? And we always temper our knowledge with what the ramifications of them are. But for the other parts of wisdom to operate, wisdom's got to be there first. It's the most referenced element of wisdom in the Proverbs, because without it, nothing else is sufficient on its own. And the big thing with knowledge is that it can only contribute. So that is the limits of knowledge. We're going to move on to the next term, and that is Binah. And so this is knowledge subjected to refinement, and it's not used as frequently as dot in the Proverbs, but it is pretty frequent, and that is, it's used 12 times as a noun of its own, but then 30 times as a verb, meaning like to understand, to perceive. And it comes from, like, all these other words, that there's a verb that forms its root base, and that is the verb bean, and that actually means to separate and distinguish. So it's not understanding until it can distinguish truth from fact. That's why true and false questions were such a battery of education early on. Is it demonstrates whether you're actually proficient in the subject if you can identify what's false and true. So whereas knowledge is going to compile and merge this information, understanding does the opposite. It divides information, and it separates it out. It sorts the wheat from the chaff. It makes distinctions. It's going to contrast the differences, which is at the heart of the Proverbs themselves. Is they're here to teach how to think, or how to rule, how to navigate life. Well, you require understanding to do it, and so it contrasts two things: one right, one wrong, and that is a form that really is going to separate the person who understands from the person who doesn't. And the big thing is, as you develop this binah, Uh, it's the person who can put all the knowledge out on the table and sort it and draw the relationships. They can analyze more than one item at a time, and so because of this, the person with Binah, they see the big picture. They have systematic thinking. They're analytical. They're able to connect dots, and this whole idea of Binah, it means that you've got precision in your interpretations. That you've basically, you're eliminating what is false, so that you can have a very congruent conclusion. So the person with Binah, the person with understanding, they can explain why. They can cite their sources. They can show why they are correct. And the big thing is that they can identify truth from half truth. That they basically, a person with Binah, understanding, you're not going to fool them. They recognize the real from the fake. And understanding is knowledge can be taken at face value. Understanding, this is knowledge with depth. So the idea that if knowledge is pouring the foundation, Binah is what's making it 6 foot of concrete deep. It's much more stable and entrenched and powerful. And it does it through experimentation, comparative analysis. It doesn't just race to conclusions. The whole idea of the scientific method of how we identify what is true or false through testing. This is really this idea that how Binah, understanding, is developed. And the big thing is that it's constantly having its error expunged. It's being reproofed. And one of the big things that's going to be an obstacle to people acquiring understanding is if they feel personally invested in it. Well, nobody likes to be told they're wrong, and they want to cling to the things that they want to believe in, and they don't want reproof, they don't want rebuke, they don't want correction. And because of this, there's an internal resistance to understanding. And this is how someone can be very intelligent. They can have a lot of, like what we talked about yesterday, the sekel, but without the Binah, the understanding. Well, now this is how one becomes the kesil, the fool, as you've insisted on believing on wrong things, and you want the refining process to stop because it makes you uncomfortable. But Binah, it demonstrates its proficiency through testing. This is why someone who has knowledge, maybe they've studied the subject. Well, they haven't studied it as much as the guy who's got the doctorate in the subject, because he had to prove over years and years and very intense testing that he does in fact know true from false, and he can explain in depth these very small nuances. He's so immersed in a subject that there's basically, Binah is the opposite of confusion. And people who have it, like the idea of someone with a PhD, you're not going to throw them some curveball that they're unprepared to hit. And the person who possesses Binah, it has more than just a function for knowledge. It's got to be applied for morality, and in the sense of that we can identify what is true and what is false. You can also, once you have understanding, you will identify what is right and what is wrong morally. And because of this, the person with Binah, they're able to make very sound judgments. They don't have crazy irrational thoughts. They don't fly off the handle. They connect cause and effect, and as a result, they tend to be much more emotionally balanced as well. So the one who possesses understanding is also, because they have this depth of knowledge and they can explain the nuance, they can answer the questions. The person with understanding is just like by nature a natural teacher. So Binah, incredibly important to develop in the pursuit of wisdom. And like each of these, they're going to have their own challenges. So the big thing is, it's right in the Proverbs. Lean not on your own understanding. So no matter how smart you are, no matter how much knowledge you have, no matter how much understanding you have in subjects, no matter how good you are at systemic analysis and broad understanding across many things, you're still subordinate to God. No understanding can ever not only not match it, it can't even approach it. So that's the big thing, is that as you develop understanding, you have to devote almost as much time. Now, I would say you do have to devote as much time as developing humility in the subject, and to not be the big shot about your understanding, and not to rely on it. To still seek God, still, no matter how much you understand something, you still, that's not what you want to rely on. You want to rely on God and His revelation. But there are other challenges to understanding, is that it can easily become over-analysis. You can be so immersed in something and so knowledgeable and have so much understanding of a subject that you actually are able to reach the wrong conclusion because you've overthought it. You've missed the plainly obvious thing because you've overcomplicated it. The other thing with understanding is that information changes over time, or understanding of things changes over time, and so it's understanding is always fluid. It has to adapt. It has to be able to accept new inputs. Once you feel like you understand something, if you harden yourself to new information, well, guess what? Now you're the Kasil. You're the hard-headed one. And as always, everything. Each of these intellectual inputs, they're always subject to moral corruption. So it's always going to be a vulnerability, and that's why we don't stop at acquiring wisdom. That it is a midway point on acquiring righteousness. So righteousness is always the goal, and that's only when we're going to take our knowledge and our understanding and we're going to apply it to moral things as well. So, to conclude with Binah, with understanding, it's the single most reliable of the internally developed traits. It's the most practical of the internally development. You're going to use it and access it the most frequently. Virtually everything you do in life is going to connect to and tap into your understanding. And as we talked about, it's because a person with great understanding can become very successful. It can easily become pride. So, you have to constantly hedge your bets against it, and it's the thing that's the most frequently warned against in wisdom, is that your understanding can become this terrible blind spot if you over rely on it. And so we're going to go ahead and finish up with the last of the internally developed traits, and so whereas knowledge is the raw material and understanding is the refining, our last term, Tevunah, this is the polished gemstone. This is understanding, polished up to full, complete brilliance. And Tevunah is used 14 times as a noun, because it comes from the same base root verb as Binah, which is being. They overlap as this verb, and it's very context dependent of whenever it will, in Proverbs, it'll use Binah or Tevunah, and we'll get into why that is. But essentially, another meaning for the verb being is understanding, like a deeper understanding. And so because of this, this term Tevunah, it's very complex and multifaceted, and so it's very context dependent. And the most basic understanding of Tevunah is Binah can have a conceptual aspect to it, but Tevunah, this is always an action. It's the Binah moving from potential to kinetic. This is something being executed. It's moving out of theory and into operation. And Tevunah is like a muscle. It grows with usage, with deployment. And the main thing that it has where it's going to separate itself from Binah is in the context. And the two major context inputs would be insight and discernment. And this nuance, when they were trying to translate Hebrew into English, makes it very difficult because, essentially this word can mean three things, but since it only has the one word in English, it's hard to make this distinction. So the best way to think about it is that Binah will get the answer correct, and it can point to and show you where and how and why. Tevunah, they get the answer right, but they can't necessarily explain how. And the way I think of Tevunah is it's this ability to have clarity in a murky situation. And so because of that, the first way that it gets defined in English is insight. And Tevunah is what is accessed. It's what's used when the answer isn't in a book. Probably the best example of someone using Tevunah in a practical matter is the way that a mother will deal with a newborn. The baby can't speak, so it can cry, and this mother, she's going to have this Tevunah where she knows, does he need his diaper changed? Does he need to be fed? Does he need a nap? Does he need to be burped? What's going on? And she can just know. And when you ask her how, she's not going to be able to explain it. She just knows. That's Tevunah. So the person with insight, with this Tevunah, they're going to have incredible power at solving problems. There's a creativity that a person with Tevunah will have, where the answer isn't so obvious, and yet somehow they're able to recognize what the solution actually is. And the person with Tevunah, they can bridge unconnected things that nobody else would have thought to do, and they have all these aha moments. On the emotional level and the relationship level, the person with Tevunah, they're incredible at giving great advice. That you can go and talk to this person with Tevunah, and without knowing a single person, without really knowing much else, they can tell you what the correct thing to do is. They just have this tremendous insight. And because of this, people who are in like problem solving fields like computer programmers or mechanics, they're going to rely on this idea of Tevunah pretty frequently. And it's the idea that someone's like very insightful. The other side of Tevunah will get translated into English as discernment, and it's very closely associated with insight, for much the same reason that they're able to see something clearly when it isn't actually clear. So the person with Tevunah, they're going to be great at decoding patterns. With just like very limited points of data, they can see what is not obvious. So when you think of someone who's like really good at a crossword puzzle or something like Wheel of Fortune, there can be no letters. There can be one letter on the thing, and bam, they just instantly solve the puzzle, because they've got this Tevunah that can see these patterns. And the person with Tevunah will also have in the emotional realm, like you'll see women especially, though they're very good at this side of things, is this idea of intuition and empathy, where they understand at a gut level what's happening in a certain situation, and they can't really articulate or explain how or why, but they just know. And it's also this idea of Tevunah as discernment it's a spiritual gift. It's literally one of the spirit gifts of the spirit, rather, is that you can have the spiritual gift of discernment when you are encountering a very difficult situation. You can literally pray for discernment in this one situation, and because of this, discernment is very closely related to revelation. And when you get into the deep spiritual side of discernment, you really only can develop this through extreme obedience, and that a person who is becoming very holy, they will develop this idea, because God, this is the idea that you are so close to Him that you'll cross out of this physical barrier, or you'll be so spiritually developed that you too can see these kind of things. And it can be kind of spooky if you've ever met someone who's got just tremendous spiritual discernment, because they're just so immersed in obedience and holiness and humility, and that they've received this as a spiritual gift. But I kind of think of Tevunah, this is wisdom as art, and it's what we would call brilliance. It's the idea that this is wisdom that's shining. It's these strokes of genius that are visible from a distance. And the other thing that a person with Tevunah will have is just, they can always read the situation. They have an extreme emotional intelligence, and it's going to control their behavior and their speech very, very well. They don't really step on the rake. They know exactly how to navigate these like extremely thorny situations. When we're thinking of like examples of Tevunah, since it is such a kind of murky topic, it's very difficult to explain or point to. There's a few instances in the Bible where you can see someone like really, really, really demonstrating Tevunah. The first one that jumps out is Daniel and Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar is having these crazy dreams, and he's got his own wise men and wizards and stuff, and none of them can figure this out, and he's just having them killed, and it's like there's real big consequences for not getting it right. Well, Daniel, he's the only one who gets it right, and he's able to tell him with extreme accuracy what he's dreaming and what they all mean, and so that's an example of Tevunah. Another example is Solomon himself. Very early on in his career as a king, these two ladies are fighting. They're claiming that this newborn infant is theirs, and neither one is backing down. And Solomon, he has this moment of clarity where he's like, okay, well then we're gonna kill the infant, and because he knows that like the one who the infant doesn't belong to is going to say, okay, fine, but the mother who the infant actually belongs to will say, no, let her have it, because she wants her baby to live. And sure enough, he uses his Tevunah to get down to the truth of the matter. And with discernment and insight, just like Binah and Dat, there's going to be challenges, because this is the least clear and the one with the least basis. It's the easiest to be wrong and jump to a false conclusion. It's the least reliable. A person with Tevunah, in one instance, it's not like they can just summon it at will, like they press a little button. It's something that God can withhold. You can develop it, but it's not immediately accessible. So don't construct heroes. If you see somebody who has demonstrated they've got great Tevunah, don't think that they're going to, they're not Superman. They can fail. And if you're the one who's shown that you've got Tevunah, don't think you got this little, ace of spades in your back pocket. You can play at any time, because God will strategically remove Tevunah at key moments, and this is the main thing that he uses to humble the proud. Is once somebody's become like really impressed with their own wisdom, it's like, I got something for you, and you'll end up in this key moment, and you think you're gonna pull it out, and you're gonna find out it's not there. So it's the most dangerous threat to humility. If you have shown yourself to have Tevunah, if you start looking in the mirror and you see yourself as the genius, you are on the path towards destruction. And so as you develop Tevunah in your quest for wisdom, as you're becoming this Hocham, as you're becoming this Siddiq, you have to double down. You have to really, the moment you start recognizing that you've got some Tevunah, it should humble you. You should really, 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 really lean in to the idea of, okay, now I have to be that much more humble. But to conclude, all of this, of the internally developed traits, these are the ones that, the majority of the time that someone's going to show wisdom or use wisdom, it's going to come from these three traits. Now, we're going to have three externally developed traits, and to be well-rounded, you have to have plenty of that as well. But your day-to-day, moment-to-moment life, you're either going to use wisdom, understanding, or insight and discernment. Those are the three things that, if you don't develop humility, they can easily become pride. If you don't develop morals and ethics, then they can be used for corruption and internal just destruction, immoral purposes. And overdependence on each of these three things are constantly warned against in the Bible. It's at the end of the day, the relationship with God, the development of a person's heart, and there's no human wisdom that can stand up to that, or that is on an equal level. In fact, that's a literal proverb. Proverbs 21:30. There is no wisdom, no understanding, no counsel against Yahweh. But I thank you for watching. Looks like we're going to have at least 2, possibly 3, maybe even 4 videos to get through the remaining inputs and to reach a conclusion for these, but I'll be linking all of them together in a playlist for quick references and timestamps, so that when we encounter these words in a proverb, I don't have to spend a lot of time explaining it each time. I can just point up to the thing and say, hey, there you go. You can, if you want to know more about Binah, you can click on this link. But if you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe and just let other people know that we exist. Shalom.